Hi, I'm Marty Weiner. I'm the Vice President of MGM Resorts Event Productions. I have done several career pivots in my life and have a long career in both events, communication, and in both for-profit and nonprofit locations. I'm excited to be here with you tonight, and thank you so much for having me.
Chris?
Yeah, my name's Chris West. I'm a Group Hospital Chief Executive Officer. I'm actually in Seattle, so enjoying my cool weather up here, but definitely missing the hustle and bustle of Las Vegas. So I've been in healthcare for about 16 years now. I started out in the military healthcare area and worked a little correctional healthcare. I've worked in acute care hospitals, and now I primarily support behavioral health hospitals. So a few career pivots, and as Marty said, I'm very excited as well to be here with you all this afternoon. So thanks.
Thank you. And we have Drew. You're on mute. There we go.
I think I'd figure it out. I've done enough of these. My name is Drew Heaps. I am a two-time UNLV graduate, graduated in '94 with a degree in hospitality and 2010 with my MBA. I've spent about 30 years in the lodging industry. 20 of those years I spent running hotels for various management companies and investment groups. For the past 10 years, I've been on the consulting side, still in the hotel industry, but have jumped around a little bit in my career path and landed in a place I never thought I would be, but I'm happy for it, especially now with all of the events going on in the world. It's been a good place to be. So I'm happy to be here with you today and share some experiences with you.
Thank you so much. So to get us started, can you all share a time where you navigated a career change and why you decided to make that pivot? Let's start with Drew.
Yep. So in 2008, when the housing market affected our economy pretty drastically, I was running hotels in southern Utah, and that market was hit pretty hard, very similar to Las Vegas and Phoenix. And being a smaller market, we relied heavily on tourism and some of the other economic drivers that just disappeared overnight. And that's when I went back to school. I felt it was important for me to gain not only some additional education, but really to reevaluate my direction of my career. And my intention was to grow my career staying in the hotel industry, which I did, but it actually took a turn from what I anticipated, or at least what I expected to do. And I ended up in an area that was really, to me, a surprise. And I'm happy that I did it because it allowed me to be exposed to a couple of different areas that I never would have considered. And having run hotels, I ended up in a consulting role where now I was consulting with them. So it actually benefited me to be able to talk to them in the language that I was familiar with. But still transitioning, still looking at different things that come up on my plate periodically as it relates to new ways of working in my career.
Thank you so much. Marty, would you like to go next? Unmute. Let me just unmute you. There we go.
Yeah, sure. So I think that there are two key pivots that I would talk about. The first is what I would lovingly call my first very midlife crisis, but very early on, was about a year after I'd graduated from college, and I had gone into finance because I had majored in economics and political science, and I was doing things that were in banking, and it fit every profile that I had learned about in school. And unfortunately, nobody had told me that what you're supposed to do is take your personality into account when you went for a job. So I had been sitting in a room doing cash flows for about a year when I thought, oh my gosh, this can't be what adulthood is like, right? This is terrible. So, and then you panic because you don't know what to do. I've had exactly 1 year of professional experience. I had no idea what direction to head in. And I ended up getting some really good advice about certainly counting your personality into that mix, but also, using the composite of your skills, which is how I started my career in events. I redid my resume based on a lot of my co-curricular activities and volunteerism that had a lot of the same skill sets, and started my career in events. And if you flash forward, 15 years after that, I had a similar moment in time. I think that one more closely qualified as more of a midlife crisis. And not really. And, it was a moment where we were starting to say, okay, you know what? I've been in corporate for a really long time. I love what I'm doing, but the challenges are similar, right? I've been in this role, I've grown, it's been great. And what I ended up doing, and the pivot I took at that point, was my effort to really be in a more mission-driven version of my career. So I started to look at opportunities and turned to and actually spent 4 years in higher ed before returning to corporate. And that was another really fascinating pivot. Learned a lot about both environments. So I think both of those really shaped how I look at all of these subjects.
Thank you, Marty. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. Wow, tough to follow Drew and Marty. You guys had amazing careers. And you both hit on things that I think were really important to me when I make career pivots as well. Going back to grad school, I deployed a couple of times in the Army. I had done face-to-face counseling. I had done group facilitation, and I thought I wanted to be a therapist, and I knew that was my mission, what I was meant to do. I went to work in the correctional facilities during grad school for the Army, and really reinforced that I was going to be an individual therapist. And then my last semester of grad school, I got the opportunity to work on a project with a veterans organization in Kansas City. And it was really kind of at the macro level. I did a lot of the administration. I did a lot of the kind of the business aspects and hiring and understanding what culture from a workplace perspective we wanted to have there. And I realized that was really my passion. I wanted to impact change on a much larger scale. So I shifted my focus, became an administrator in behavioral health, so an administrative advocate with social work, and never looked back. So I was an administrator for a while with behavioral health teams across the country through the Army. And then when I got out of the Army, I shifted gears again and decided I want to work in medical hospitals. So went to work there again. To your point, Marty, it was really a shift for me that was focused on what matched my mission, vision, and value. So I went to work for a nonprofit organization and did a lot of outreach, community outreach, and that was fantastic for me in terms of being able to help a different population that I had never worked with. And so again, another career shift into a different career field. But I found my way back to behavioral health, my original calling, and so that's where I'm at now.
Thank you, Chris. So you've all shared a past experience or experiences where you've actually navigated a career change, but can we go a little deeper and talk about what are some pros and cons of making a career change?
Okay, I'll jump in. I think for me, pros and cons, I will tell you, I actually made a shift about 2 years ago from being a hospital administrator in Las Vegas to really, in my mind, seeing that I wanted to be at a higher level and impact multiple markets, right? So outside of even Las Vegas, I wanted to do outreach. I was doing rural outreach in some small villages in Alaska with behavioral health and work, but also continue to work in Las Vegas. For me, there was a lot of pros to that in the sense that I got to fulfill something that had really been heavy on my heart. But the cons of that were, I think there's a lot of give and take, right? And so I have 2 young daughters. I've been married for 15 years, but 2 young daughters that really missed their dad when I was away. And so I think the balance of that, where do we start to balance who we want to be identified as? Do we want to identify as a parent and a caregiver, or do we want to identify as who we are in our jobs, in our roles? And so it really challenged me from a pros and cons perspective to really go back and see what's important, what outweighs what, and try to find something that met what I felt at work, but also allowed me to fulfill my obligations at home as well. So that's how I ended up in Seattle.
Thank you so much. Drew, would you like to add on?
You bet. Based on our recent world events, the hotel industry is taking a beating, and probably around mid-May, I found out I was going to be furloughed. In fact, 70% of our corporate team globally was furloughed for June, July, August. So naturally, my instinct is to get myself ready to make another change. And at the same time, hoping that I could come back to my role, which I really enjoyed. But it's just hard. It was hard to tell what was going to happen. So found myself recreating my resume a couple of different ways, and knew that I couldn't, particularly if I wanted to stay in the hotel industry, I knew it was going to be tough because the whole industry was taking a beating. And now I was up against 30 million people looking for jobs instead of all-time low unemployment records, where we've just gone the opposite. The pendulum has swung. So I've been doing learning and development for the last 5 years, and so that was my direction. And so, but to be able to get any kind of traction, I knew I had to remove most of my hotel operation experience because it wasn't even relevant. I was looking at learning and development in technology, which is pretty strong where I live. I'm in Salt Lake City. We've got a pretty strong tech corridor here. So every one of those tech organizations has learning and development. So that was the direction I took. And it took me a little bit to really let go of what I've known for the last 30 years and focus on what I have learned and established over the last 5 years, and make sure that my resume reflected that, as well as my ambition for learning and development, which I really enjoy educating people. And luckily, I'm back in my job. It's like I never left. So good news, occupancies are back up, and hopefully they're sustainable. But I still know that if I want to go in that direction, that there's opportunity. I just got to make sure that I'm visible enough to compete with people who have that background and have been doing it for a long time.
Thank you. Marty, anything you'd like to add?
Well, first of all, Drew, I am with you 100% on those occupancies. Let us keep those babies right up there. To add a fast cap on that, I think that, there's one big pro and one big con to a career pivot, right? If you want advancement, like Chris was talking about his advancement, you need to say yes to the opportunities, right? Career pivots are good things because you need to say yes, and you need to pivot, and you need to show you're willing to take risks, try new things. On the other hand, when you pivot too much, then people ask a lot of questions about, did you stick with something? Where's your subject matter expertise? So I think to Drew's point, there's so much nuance to how you put that together. So, I think that there are pros and cons to all of it. And, and I think every one of those junctures has to be an educated decision of, does this get me closer to a further role, or does this make me look like I was a little undecisive or didn't know where to go, or that I hop around too much? And you can write anything in there. You can make a good story out of anything. So I would never say it's a bad idea. I just think that those are the pros and cons.
Thank you so much. So we have a question that just dropped into the chat. Someone is asking, I'm transitioning from a completely non-tech background to a career field that requires heavy tech skills. Since my current experience is sort of irrelevant to the industry I'm going into, I only have my education and projects to showcase on my resume. Do you have any advice for me to sort of present myself to employers as an entry-level candidate? Does anyone else? start with that one?
I could jump in and take that one. I think thanks for that question. I think that's it's a neat question. It's complex in a few ways. I think the easiest way for me to frame it, how that has really impacted my career pivots is, you kind of have your tangible and intangible aspects of how you really market yourself. And so outside of the technical, and you mentioned, you have your education, you have your projects, those are tangible things you can walk in and lay on someone's desks. What are the things that you can't walk in and lay out for somebody? What are the things that you're going to demonstrate, and no matter what role you're in, from a leadership perspective, from a teamwork perspective, from a skills perspective, how you're going to communicate with your peers, with your leaders, and with your customer, that you may have been able to utilize and perfect in your previous field, that you're going to be able to maximize and use for your maximum potential in your new field. So I'll give you an example. When I transitioned from the Army to civilian healthcare, there are so many things, regulatory, insurances, just really patient care experiences that do not translate from the Army to a civilian healthcare hospital. But what did translate was my ability to work within a team, my ability to respond to an emergency, my ability to interact with my teammates on a project. And so I think those are the things that I actually highlighted in my resume. Marty's point, I think, being able to kind of rewrite your resume, and you expand on that and say, how do you rewrite how you present yourself to someone? So maybe, yeah, I have that education, that experience in those projects, but let me tell you what else I'm bringing to the table that is going to directly translate to me working side by side or across from somebody on your team in this new field. So if that makes any sense.
So kind of speaking of searching for new employment, and once you decide to make that pivot, can you discuss some common pitfalls that people may make while they're looking for employment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that common pitfalls people make, a few, let's talk some technical ones first. Proofreading. Your cover letter and your resume, right? It's really important that it's really well done, that it doesn't have typos, that everything is spelled correctly, that you're addressing it to the correct person that you can find, right? This is the first impression that you're often making on this. And if you're especially outside of your industry, if you aren't well networked in that space and you're relying on your paperwork to really get you an entry to the conversation, the other thing is connecting the dots for those who are reading it. People underestimate the importance of those cover letters, cover emails, whatever that initial point of contact is. Make it easy for the reader to understand. To Chris' point about, how the skills are transferable, make sure you're including your great story up front in 3 sentences about, I don't know, though my experience is in X, it is applicable to this because Y, and here's an example of how I've done that. Because leaving out the things that help a hiring manager connect the dots makes it harder for them to find you. And I think that's a very big pitfall that people fall into.
Thank you, Marty. Once we decide that we're ready to make this change, do you have any tips for strategies that we can utilize to create a career pivot launch plan?
I can jump in. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Go ahead. You're on a roll.
No, I was just going to say, I think that kind of recaps everything that I think that Marty put out there from a resume standpoint. What's your story, and what's the next step in that? When I interview people for leadership positions or even frontline operators, one of the things I ask every person, no matter what their interview is where do you want to go? What's your terminal role? Where do you want to end up? And I think that says a lot about the person. It doesn't have to be the career field you're in now. I think part of looking forward is understanding what's important to you and where you want to be. I've never been an educator. My goal is to one day teach high school history, and I'll get there when the time is right. But But I think understanding when you make that pivot, why are you making it? What's important? Going through those pros and cons. So I think as a first step to the question here, I would sit down and say, okay, where do I want my story to go next? What story do I want to have in my life that represents who I am, but also what I stand for? Because I will tell you, and I think everyone else would agree, those things are very important when it comes to selecting your employer. So when you go to interview, you're not just being interviewed, you're also interviewing your potential employer. And so if you don't know those things, where you want your story to go and how you want to be, how you want to be represented, you might not select the right employer that matches those goals too. So, yeah, that's it.
I'll throw in a couple of things, and I thought even more about fundamentals. Be open to several resumes. I mean, and it's kind of painful to write those. At least it is for me, especially when I'm doing my best to be creative on what do I want to tell this recruiter or company about me that doesn't relate to the other careers I've worked in. And for my challenge, everything's hotel. So how do I alter or adjust running a hotel business to running a business and being sales and marketing focused, and take that piece out of my hotel background and apply that to whatever that resume looks like? But I'd be open to a couple of different resumes. Also, networking and the value of that. I mean, that's a pretty no-brainer. But do we really effectively network? If you're an introvert like me, it's hard. It's challenging to go out and meet people. And so, okay, what does networking look like for an introvert who's a little bit timid when it comes to that? Because I always feel like I'm bothering people, which I may be. But what's my game plan? Because it's got to happen. It's an important part of building relationships. And to me, those two elements are a big part of making that shift.
Thank you, Drew. So, Chris, you had previously mentioned the importance of focusing on some of those transferable skills on your resume, especially when you're transitioning to a new field. Do you have any tips on how we should refer to some sector-specific job titles that might be confusing? Is there any additional information we should add to those to explain what they are?
I think it's a tough one. Part of it is understanding. So the question here is, are you, if you don't understand the transition, so if I have a position and I'm transitioning out of my current field, how to present that title, what my current title is?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think that's part of it, is understanding even just the basics between what a director is in, say, an IT field versus a director is in hospitality, and being able to speak to that, because I think there's different there's a different connotation behind just simple words like that. But the other piece is outside of titles, I think to the point of the resumes that we've been speaking about, how do you what's the narrative that goes past your title, right? So if you put a title on there that is your formal title, but me in a different industry, I have no idea what that is. What's that one line or two lines that's going to allow me to say, okay, you were in charge of a team of 6 people and you were responsible for the sales that they produce in that quarter, if I'm not able to gather that from your title? Or what are those intangible things that you had to demonstrate every day in that role to make sure your team was successful, or to make sure that those around you that were on your team and your peers were successful as well? So I think I don't see an issue when I get a resume of a little line or two after the title that just explains kind of what you did there, because I think we're seeing that more often where people are shifting careers. And I've seen that a few times where you have a little narrative after your title, just explaining, and it really defines the impact you had on that organization while you're with them, or what you're doing currently with them.
Thank you. So we just got a question in the chat here. Are there any books that you recommend that really resonated or impacted your life, career, and or perhaps even beyond? Relationships, leadership skills, fulfilling happiness, or more?
I'll throw one out there. I'm a Stephen Covey fan, and his son wrote a book called Speed of Trust. Excellent book, great way of incorporating those trust factors into building relationships in organizations and business. And Covey's really good at that. It's all about business and specifically organizational factors that create trust versus personal, though he does provide some insight that one can incorporate into their personal life. But from a business standpoint, that's a great one. And it's all about building relationships of trust, regardless of what industry we're in. I mean, that's where relationships flourish. That's where deals get done. That's where those business relationships continue to grow and progress.
Thank you. Marty, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Let's see. Let's go super old school. I actually think I am a very well disguised introvert. And I think that one of those that resonated really well, Drew, you will appreciate this, is Dale Carnegie, right? How to make friends and influence people. I think for somebody who did not inherently know that you could be salesy without being salesy, it was really helpful in a way that you didn't expect in a book that has that title. I also think that for especially when you are transitioning and doing a pivot, a book that I go back to over and over is The First 90 Days. It's about shortening your learning curve for that 90-day period and using your peers and understanding the culture. And it provides some really good sort of tactical steps. And then I think the last one I'd throw out there, just because in the spirit of this conversation, I don't know that this was life altering, the book more than the movie, but you have to love an eat, pray, love kind of moment, right? I mean, everybody wants that book contract. So you can choose 3 different countries. You can study Italian and, sit and meditate in Indonesia and so on and so forth, right? If you're one of those people who wants to do everything in your life and your career is going to, reflect that a little bit, it's okay, right? Like figure it out, find the path, go forth and do it, because your happiness does matter. And, there's really not balance in the way that you think, but you find it in the way that makes sense for you.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, no, and I actually just grabbed this off the shelf. It was given to me by one of my mentors. It's called The 10 Stories That Great Leaders Tell by Paul Smith. It's a pretty easy read. You could probably read it on a short flight, but I like that because I'm a big storyteller in all the roles that I play, whether husband, father, leader, coworker, peer. This book, it kind of builds your toolkit for stories that you should have as a leader, as a team leader, as an operator, that you can just kind of point to on the fly, because it really explains who you are. So it's stories like why I lead the way I lead. You should have a story that defines why you lead or why you operate the way you operate, or a story about where you've come from as a company and where you want to go and why that is. And so, but having those 10 stories that Paul talks about in your toolkit that you can pull from and point to has been such a huge resource for me. If I'm meeting a new client in the field, if I'm meeting a new team at a different hospital, it's just been such a neat, very easy, quick read to have in the toolkit.
Thank you all so much. Those sound great.
Good one.
So we also had another question in the chat. Do you know if there are any fields where career pivots are looked down on, or where it's kind of too late in the game to start in that field?
I'll take that. I think I don't know of any. I think if anything, it's more welcomed now than it has ever been. I hope education is not one, because at some point I'll transition to that later in my career. But no, I think part of it is I love hearing why people transition if they do pivot, because usually it's driven by passion. And I think as a leader, as somebody who operates with a team, that's one of the best things to hear. The other piece is, I think being able to tell that story as to why, the same thing we've been talking about, why that pivot is, will be impactful to that. But as far as I know, I don't know that there's any that is looked down upon when you make that pivot, either early or later. So.
Yeah, I don't know either. Good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some, I think of things that are very highly regulated or things that you need some criteria. Having been a recent transplant from New Jersey, I know that some of the pharmaceutical, and again, not impossible, but sometimes it's a little harder on things that are highly regulated, or you needed a level of certifications in there. And again, it just means you're starting a little later. It does not mean it's impossible. So, it depends what type of challenge you're up for in some of those industries if you're trying to break in.
Yeah, I had a friend who was in customer service and wanted to be an actuary with an insurance company, and went through all the training, and it probably took him 7 years to get into that role. And it would have been easy for him to give up, after year 2 and just say, you know what, I'm going to do something else. This isn't working. But at the time that he was transitioning, the industry was getting hit hard. They weren't hiring, but he hung in there, continued to do customer service on the side, and eventually got into that industry, and he's been doing it for 20 years. So maybe persistence.
Thank you all so much. We got another question. Someone is asking if there's a field that is really high in demand right now.
I think in the tech industry, computer programmers are high in demand. I've got a couple of neighbors that do that, and they pretty much go wherever they want to go, wherever the best offer is. And they're certainly tech nerds, and I say that with all sincere respect. But that's all they do is program. But they pretty much command their job. They can go where they want with whatever company they want. And we've got Adobe here and Oracle and some of the other big names, and they've landed in some great spots. I know that's one.
Hey, it's Kevin. Yeah, I just started graduate school, kind of changing to, I was kind of relating with your actuary, because I went to school for econ math and I wanted to be an actuary. And now I'm in like UNLV for econ and applied data analysis. But I'm thinking about switching to MIS, but I don't know. At the end, I have no clue what I want to do. So I don't think any of them really stick with me. So I don't even know if I should continue or not. I was thinking about going in the military, but then I don't know if they're really taking much people right now. But yeah, I think the satisfaction for being in a programming job or STEM or actuary, I mean, it's a lot of pressure and it's constantly changing. So I hate that. I don't know. You guys have any advice?
This has been not, to me, it's a very gray area, because a lot of it changes, right? I think it's a moving target. I mean, for me, it's probably not applicable to this conversation, but nursing is always high in demand. So if anybody on this chat is a nurse, you can come to Seattle, because I need nurses. No, but I think part of it, Kevin, you bring up a good point, right? I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes to pick a career and stick with it and have to know what your vision is and where you're going to go. And I think just talking on this panel, you can understand that sometimes it's okay to not know, right? I mean, you know what your passion is, it sounds like. You know where you want to drive change and where you want to make an impact, but you're not really sure how to get in there or where exactly you want it to be. And I think that's okay. I think that's okay to sit with that and understand that you're still working towards that, and not, maybe you don't know the definite, but I think what the hot job is sometimes is a moving target. To Drew's point, I spent a lot of time in Seattle too, and they're popping up, or Salt Lake City, tech popping up everywhere. Seattle's popping up everywhere. Tech's popping up everywhere too, and it's those sweeping trends that we see. And so But I think to the overall point that I was trying to make is I think it's okay sometimes to sit and really learn about yourself. You know you want to be in tech, you know you want to where you want to impact change, but you just don't really know how to get in there. I think sometimes that's okay.
I don't want to be in tech. I just have to be in tech for job. The only thing I like is math, but like they don't just let me do math unless I have a PhD. So like I have to do tech just to get a job, really.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about that, and hopefully relevant to all of our audience members in this, the areas that you're studying, the great thing I think about this, especially areas like data science, et cetera, that the job you're going to be excited about may not even exist yet, right? I think that the evolution of these positions goes so fast, and the things that are happening, you might even be in a place, and I hope that everybody in this call is in a place to create your own path and make the job you want. So much of this now is take the skills you have and create the path you want. And the reason you can pivot is because there aren't clear career paths now or lines, et cetera. So, if you're passionate about something, but the job you want doesn't quite exist, there's an opportunity to within an organization, entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial, you have some opportunity in that. So, it's good. And the pace at which these things change, you don't want the same job title forever. Make up the one you want and say, okay, if it doesn't exist, I'm going to pick it.
That's a good point, Marty. Thank you.
Thank you all. So as we prepare to launch a career pivot, what are some strategies or exercises that might help us identify our career strengths and gaps so that we may better prepare?
I think that from a strengths and opportunities perspective, I think the first thing you need to do, which is good because it's easy to talk, to do this and without even needing to engage strongly, is I'd looked up on LinkedIn every type of job you want and read the profiles of everybody who has them. Whether it's quite right, a little right, not right at all, read the profile of every person that has the job that you think you want. Do you have the types of skills they have? Have you ever been endorsed for the types of leadership characteristics and hard skills that they have and soft skills that they have? Figure out if there's anything in there, and then jump on some LinkedIn Learning. See if what you're missing are actually the things you're even interested in, right? You could take a couple of things and be like, all right, I really thought I wanted to be a people leader, but when it comes right down to it, and I've sat through some of these HR things and I'm learning about conflict and hard conversations, be like, you know what? I can grow my career, but be a really great individual contributor. Or I love to manage people. I'm trying to be detail oriented, and every one of these people is detail oriented, but I know in my heart that is never going to be the thing that makes me wake up in the morning and jump out of bed, right? So you can really find out a lot of, tell the story through other people's resumes and see how it works for you.
Yeah, I'm glad Marty mentioned LinkedIn Learning. That was one that came to my mind. The other thing I asked a couple of colleagues when I was looking at tech as an option for learning and performance development, and I showed them my resume and I said, pull everything out of here that supports your industry. Don't look at the hotel. What can I bring over? What will transition? And they pulled out a lot more than I noticed, probably because I was a little insecure in my ability to make that transition. And so getting some insight from some colleagues in the industry was really helpful and helped me really refocus, especially when it came to recreating a resume that I wanted to share with those strengths and skills and background. That input from those colleagues was helpful.
That's exactly right. Along those lines, asking what's the day-to-day like? What do you spend your time doing in those fields? Sometimes it's this shiny new thing, and then when you get into it, it's like, well, what you see on TV in a movie is not exactly what the day-to-day is for those positions. And so, not every tech office is set up like Google, right? And so, asking, someone to be your mentor if you're looking to do a career field change, who's in that career field may not be in yours, and so. to both Drew and Marty, LinkedIn, you can learn a lot about a field through LinkedIn, whether it's looking at profiles, looking at companies, understanding what their mission, vision, values are, and really forward thinking too a little bit and say, okay, where do I want to grow with this company? Is my next role with this company, if I do go within this career field, am I going to move to a regional role? And is that something that I want to be a part of? To Marty's point, do I want to be a people leader? Do I want to make an impact on an individual level? So I think all those things combined, fantastic. Finding a mentor, the world is at your fingertips, not only with the internet, but with industries in every single city. We live in a great city in Las Vegas, where you can pretty much interact with every industry that there is, and just really get to know what those job fields are all about.
Thank you all so much. That was great advice. So speaking of mentors, we know that having mentors is important throughout your career and both your personal life. Is it valuable to diversify the type of mentors we have?
I keep going on that one since I brought a mentor. So I think absolutely. I think there's a ton of value in that. It's just like getting a different perspective. I'm sure have a different perspective of hospitality than somebody who's working in the hospitality industry as a consumer, and never somebody who's been a producer in that market. And so I think I could bring a different insight to that job field that maybe somebody who's come up in that field doesn't see. On the flip side, it's definitely obviously beneficial to have mentors in your current field to help you guide your career. But yeah, I think diversifying your mentors is huge in any field.
Yeah, I think the other note on that a mentor you have, sometimes mentors are a moment in time, right? It's something you need during a transition, or during a career escalation, or during something that's happening in your personal life. So over time, you're going to need different mentors because you are evolving also. I mean, and you might have the same mentor for 20 years and they can grow with you, and that's an amazing experience. It's also not bad to have more than one mentor. They won't give you the same perspective. They're not going to give you the same advice. Do you need to consult everybody you ever knew on every decision you need to make? No, because you will have the analysis paralysis kind of moment about your career advancement. But, it's not bad to say to yourself and to your mentor, this is for, will you mentor me for the next 3 to 6 months? Because I am working through something and this is what I'd like to talk about. So that's the other thing about, people say get a mentor, but then you're not really always entirely sure what to do with them once you have them. So identifying why you have them and what you want to accomplish in your time together actually makes it beneficial to both of you in understanding what you want to get out of it.
Yeah, and to add to that, mentorship doesn't even have to be somebody in my same industry. Maybe I want to sharpen my skills on, relationships. And like Marty mentioned, how can I be a better salesperson, and not so much nailing the sale, but just being a human being to other people and building trust. There's so many other facets to being successful in my particular career, my organization, my role. What are those other elements that I can improve on? And for me, finding somebody who has some other skill sets that are outside of my career, those are the kind of individuals I want to hang out with and learn from.
Thank you all so much. So we have a participant asking, how can I formally ask someone to be my mentor? And what should I look for in a good mentor?
I think a little bit in that, you first need to do a moment of self-exploration and what do you want to get out of it? Because if you're going to ask somebody to be your mentor and they're going to consider, if it's somebody who takes the role seriously, they're going to consider it because it's it's an obligation. It's a commitment that you're making to one another. So, I would approach somebody and say, if I want you to be my mentor, here's why I selected you. Here's what I'm hoping we can accomplish. And here's how I would like to address our mentorship. I'd like to speak once a month. I would like to meet twice a week, right? I mean, whatever is appropriate. Because if you can't make that commitment together, it's not going to be successful in what you're trying to accomplish. Or is it more of a casual thing? Hey, I'm on the job. I don't even know what I don't know yet. Is it okay if I call on you, especially in my first 90 days as a situation arises, to get some feedback? So I think you really need to almost articulate your scope of work in your mentorship, especially if it's somebody you're approaching about it and saying, I think that this is, what I want to do. I mean, just recently I had, with all of our changes at MGM, through the industry, through the pandemic, I just recently approached a person that I just started working with not long ago who has a very different discipline. And I said, what you do influences what I do daily, but I don't know enough about the drivers of your part of the business. Would it be okay if you became my mentor to teach me about that side of the business? And it's not about whether or not this person has a better job than you or a title or any of those things. Is there a body of knowledge or something that they can help you with, right? And it could be a peer who could be a really good mentor. If you are, let's just say like I am a little bit later on and you don't know how to work every little gadget, you might be asking somebody who's very entry level to be your mentor to help you be more efficient in using technology, right? You think long and broad about what that is and what that looks like. So as long as you're specific about the request and what you want to get out of it, I think that there are really, there are really interesting ways that you can approach that conversation and have everybody feel good about it.
Great advice.
Thank you so much. So we have another participant asking, is it acceptable to reach out or to connect with people in managerial positions through social media such as LinkedIn? If so, what are some of the good ways to start the initial conversation when sending a request?
I think it's appropriate. I think the expectations have to be limited. I mean, I think depending on what your goals are, if your goals are to learn about their field, or maybe you're interested in joining their company, and you may possibly want to know more about what their day-to-day is, what their values is. I think expectations for a response, I wouldn't have high expectations, right? I'm just being honest. I think a lot of times we get so, for those of you that are on LinkedIn, you get kind of, people will reach out, and so I think your question, the second part of your question is probably the most important, and that's how do you phrase that, right? So I get random people all the time that reach out to me on LinkedIn and just message after message, and but I think it's, right up front, the first thing that you need to say is, I'm a student, or I'm potentially looking to join your company, whatever the case is, because that's going to catch an eye, I think, as somebody. I don't think there's definitely anything wrong with it at all. I don't think the expectations are high that you necessarily get a response if it's a position where somebody is extremely busy, and they have to take time out of their day to respond to somebody that maybe they don't know. But chances are they're going to see it. So put something on that first page, just identifying exactly what you're reaching out to them for, and you're not just somebody else who's sending them a random message on LinkedIn. That's I don't know what the term is. It's kind of the auto bot, right, message that goes out to everybody. So I should probably know what that term is, but I don't know if that makes sense. So
I think that's good advice. I've reached out and have just told people, hey, I'm looking to add somebody in your industry, my network. Can't say it's been foolproof, but it works much of the time. And then, like any relationship, like Chris said, it takes time. Man, I think if somebody responds quick, that's a bonus. But, it took me a year to convince my wife to marry me. So why is somebody on LinkedIn going to do business with me just because we connect? So great point, Chris. I think low expectation, follow the individual once you make the connection. maybe like some of their comments or articles they're posting. I mean, there's ways to build relationship and reconnect over time. And I think with the algorithms nowadays on the back end of something like LinkedIn, you'll see them popping up regularly. I've noticed that as I've liked industry individuals and we've connected, I see them more often. So, but just, it's going to take time.
Thank you both. So as we near towards the end of our time together today, I think we have time for one more question. So to wrap it up, what is your best career advice for someone preparing to enter the workforce?
I can go first. And Marty, you said something that really hit home with me on your first response, I think, and that is be open to taking risks with positions and get out of your comfort zone a little bit. I had the opportunity to be a hospital CEO when I was 30, and there's no way I would have been able to get to that point in leadership without reaching out and not overextending myself, but just being uncomfortable in some part of that role. So I took a position in Wichita, Kansas, as an example. There was a vice president position. I really enjoyed the organization. I loved the position, but it was in Wichita, Kansas. Not necessarily a desirable place for me, but it was a risk that I took that really got me to a point in my career. Nothing against Wichita. If you're from Wichita, there's nothing against it. It's not Las Vegas. But it got me to a point in my career that I probably would have never gotten to if I hadn't taken a risk for the position itself. And so I think being open to opportunities, again, Marty, you hit the nail on the head earlier. I think having that sense of vulnerability sometimes is very beneficial when you start entering the workforce.
Thank you, Chris.
So I will add on to that. The best piece of advice I ever got, I will share with you all because I still think it's the best piece of advice I ever got, was that my very first vice president in my very first, when I was an event coordinator job, was always have 3 prepared answers about what direction you want your career to go in. At any juncture, there should be 3 ways that your career should go. And have the elevator speech prepared, because you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who you're going to be in a conversation with. And you don't want to make people search for your goals in your conversation. It's one thing if it's a mentor and you're trying to work out what that articulation is. But, knowing that if you had a career and you could legitimately pivot in 3 different directions on any given day, it's good to know at the beginning what those could be. And what they are today doesn't mean they'll be the same in a month and the same in a year. But to me, that always resonated as really good advice. It felt doable, it felt manageable, and it made me comfortable as somebody who was not an intuitive networker about, I have a couple of things I can talk to you about that seem ready-made and I can just take off the shelf and talk about.
Good advice from some great leaders in their industries, that's for sure. I'll throw in a couple that I wrote down. Be patient with yourself. Things, hey, what's the Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So be patient with yourself. Be a good communicator. I think there's so many ways to communicate these days. We have no excuse to not communicate and reply to people. I'm a big advocate of texting, and right, it's replaced phone calls, and I'm a big emailer, and it's just amazing how unresponsive and unreliable some people are when it comes to communicating, just kind of whenever it's convenient for them. And I'm thinking, no, we're having a conversation. So that's a big one for me. The last one is, what? Not everybody can be a CEO or a vice president. There's only so many of those positions, but those individuals need good people on their team and they need good followers. So, what? If you don't get the title, be a good follower. Good teams are built based on the organization and the people within that organization. Doesn't matter your title. I'm confident that both Chris and Marty know that having good people on their team makes their job so much easier. So if you don't get the title, be a good follower, be supportive, be happy in that role. And you know what? Being patient may pay off one day. You may get that title.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. Your advice was extremely valuable. And thank you to all our participants for joining us. I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening. We'll see you at the next workshop. Thank you again so much.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you.